Riddle me this, when you think of a battery electric vehicle that's not a Tesla, what brands do you think? Now me, I think of General Motors, specifically Chevrolet, and Nissan because they've been at it for over 10 years at a mass market level. Maybe recently you start thinking Porsche, but when it comes to fully electric vehicles, there's one noticeably absent brand there, and that would be the one that equates to a hybrid. And apparently it's going to change with a crossover wrapper. And yes, it's going to have a 4 in the name, but instead of it being a RAV, it's a bZ or bZ, and they're calling it the Beyond Zero. Apparently it's going to be a whole sub-brand. So you and I, yeah, we need to look at this thing, but we need to understand, more importantly, what this means for battery electric vehicles for civilians that are not a Tesla. Now, before you and I dive off too far into the name, rank, and serial number, that Beyond Zero brand that I just told you about, Toyota says 7 vehicles will be coming to the US, but globally, 70 will exist. They just have to decide which ones go to which markets. With that underneath the hood here, and the bad news is it's not a frunk. There's a whole lot going on here, so there's really no storage up front like in other vehicles. This is a pre-production prototype, so this doesn't work as advertised. Matter of fact, I should probably learn how to put this down before I get into this whole bit here. Anyway, we get into the electric motor, which is an AC motor. This is good in front-wheel drive application for 150 kilowatts, which would translate to about 201 horsepower. There will be an all-wheel drive model, but that's going to be 2 separate electric motors, 80 kilowatts in the front, 80 kilowatts in the back, so total 160 kilowatts, which would be about 215 horsepower. So think of this as a dual motor vehicle. Now let's put this aside here and go into the other bit, which is the architecture of the vehicle. You and I have talked about in Priuses, and actually not a lot of Priuses, but Camrys and other like mid-size to sort of small Toyotas, there is a Toyota new global architecture. Well, this is an extension of that. It is the Toyota new global architecture. And how is that different and why is it important to us? Well, it's the packaging of the batteries. When we think of like the Porsche Taycan, the batteries sit back here and they go through the under part of the vehicle and they create some part of the structure, and then there is literally a cage built around those batteries. This is a bit of a different approach. The battery's still at the same place. It's in the wheelbase. It's between the wheels of the vehicle. But what they do is they build lateral structure underneath the battery pack to create a stronger vehicle. So the idea is to add some strength without adding a hell of a lot of weight. And while we're on the topic of weight, this one, which is a front-wheel drive, this is 4,232 pounds or 1,920 kilograms. If it were all-wheel drive, it would be 4,420 pounds or 2,005 kilograms. Now let's get into sizes here. Look at this. This is a RAV4. This is the kind of vehicle most people would see in suburban parking lots, picking up rugrats, whatever you want to call it. This has the same length as this. So that gives you an idea of really how big this vehicle is. However, the wheelbase, they're very different. This is significantly smaller in wheelbase than this. This has a wheelbase closer to that of a Highlander. Now, while we're talking about gas engines, let's talk about the stuff that's related to gas engines, and that's the suspension. Here, it's very similar to the RAV4 over there. We got struts in the front, and then double wishbone in the back. Okay, now that we got the greasy bits out of the way, at least as greasy as they get when it comes to a battery electric vehicle, let's talk about the battery. In terms of size on a front wheel drive, which that is 71.4 kilowatt hours, and then there will be an all-wheel drive as we discussed, that's going to be 72.8 kilowatt hours. What does that translate to in terms of range? Well, the folks at Toyota are only sharing for front-wheel drive at this point. They're saying 250 miles of range. Now this, for the avoidance of doubt, it's not like the fancy 400-volt architecture we see in Porsche Taycans. Then we get into the whole concept of what this thing is about, the mission of these types of vehicles, where this, and the gasoline, at least, that's the plug-in hybrid version of a RAV4, where do they converge? That we have to press on to another area. And that would be the interior. Why? Because whether a crossover has an electric motor or an internal combustion engine, its mission in life is still very much the same, and that is to transport people, dogs, and rugrats to schools, malls, airports. I don't know. I'm not a practical human being, so I just look at the stuff like design, and here, unusually good outcome. And this is a challenge in a vehicle like this, because let's be honest, people that buy electric vehicles today, they're not really buying them because they're electric. They're buying them because it says Tesla. So what Toyota had a challenge in putting this thing out here is making it look different, but still making it a Toyota. And I think they've come with a good balance. Like overall, they've got this very like updated Porsche 928 type cockpit where you've got this, uh-oh, it's yelled at me. I guess it didn't like the Porsche reference. It's got this like center, wow. It really doesn't like the Porsche reference. So a center console, I'm not going to touch it. And then it's got this binnacle that's really far in front of you. And then if you move the steering column up and down, it almost moves the whole part of the binnacle, which is kind of a neat design touch. Yet they still have included toggle switches, real knobs, buttons. On the steering column, it's got a real volume toggle switch. Not haptic feedback like we saw in the NX. The only other item that's neither fish nor fowl is the volume control on the console. It's underneath the screen, and it's not a volume knob. I spoke to one of the UX designers at Toyota, and they were telling me that this will be the only vehicle with the new UX system that doesn't have a regular knob for the volume control. Instead, they decided to go with this volume thing here. It's not horrible, it's not haptic feedback, it is a real button, so I'm not gonna get angry about it. Overall, this all works very well because it's a balance of what makes Toyota Toyota. However, they've got this unique material on the dash as well as on the seats that make it feel like something more European. It's almost like what you see in a classic Porsche if it had more differentiation in the two colors. There is one item that is being introduced alongside this vehicle that's layered on top of the UX that's not in the Tundra as well as the NX, and that is over-the-air updates. Not exactly new to these types of vehicles, but new to Toyota. Spoke to some folks at Toyota to ask, is this something that's going to be limited to the electric Toyotas, or will it cascade out to the other Toyotas? Something tells me this whole sub-brand of bZ, that's going to get it first, and then we'll see it in other internal combustion engine Toyotas. Then there is the elephant in the room. In exactly one market around the world where this vehicle will be sold, it is on offer with a yoke instead of a steering wheel. Many people ask, why can't we have a yoke in North America? As a pilot, let me tell you why. Short answer, it's unsafe. Long answer, pretty much only people who are paid tens of millions of dollars to compete in F1 should be controlling vehicles that are on the ground with a yoke, or you too can spend probably about $12,000 to $20,000 of your own money to learn how to operate a vehicle with a yoke, and while you're at it, figure out how to change the steering system where it also has pedals for steering that work in conjunction with the yoke. Anything else would be highly unsafe. That's it. I said it. That's my piece. Now we need to press on to something else. Okay, if you're keeping score thus far, the mission of what this thing is designed to do does pretty good. However, it's not all puppy dogs and roses. The hip point, that means kind of where your ass sits in the seat, it's a bit too low. Now, I can understand why. The battery, it's lower. It doesn't have to package a gas tank or that kind of stuff. That's usually what you sit on. Maybe stadium seating, that'd be a nice touch. Remember we talked about the wheelbase of a Highlander, which is bigger than a RAV4. This is one of the huge benefits. But now you and I need to press on to what really sells electric vehicles. It has nothing to do with the fact that they're electric. It's all about design. People look at electric vehicles because they're different. They say, hey man, I got me a Tesla. Or even now, hey man, I got me a Taycan. That's why a Ford Mach-e looks the way it does. This is a bit of a departure. If I were to envision a RAV4 electric, this is it. There's a couple of things that have been changed here. Number one, if you look at the daylight opening here, Looks a hell of a lot like a Faraday. The front of the vehicle is where it's more interesting, where Toyota tried to go very different. They've added a clamshell hood. It's a unique design touch. You do not see it in pictures. Once you see it in person, you get detail that's not too busy. Like you look at the back of a Corvette, that's just too busy. There's just too much going on there. This is a combination of some geometric shapes. Then we get into the D-pillar here, and yeah, they've changed some things. They've added some pageantry to the taillights, the spoiler, which doesn't work in a front-wheel drive vehicle, but hey, it looks cool anyway. At the end of the day, this is going to be an interesting test in the electric car world. Can they make the jump from, I gotta have me a Tesla, to, you know what? I want a regular vehicle, something that's designed for civilians, but I want the propulsion system electric. This has to appeal to not just someone who's buying a bleeding edge vehicle, it appeals to somebody who wants to get a regular, like a Prius kind of person, but has the infrastructure to be able to charge that. But here's where we get to the wish list. Now, you and I haven't driven this vehicle. We're not gonna drive it probably into Q1 2022, but the wish list has nothing to do really with this or even Toyota. There is going to be a vehicle that looks just like this, but it's not a Toyota. It's called a Subaru, the Solterra. You see they've done the same thing here as they've done with the GR86, just not for the track or for people like me. It's an electric vehicle that says Subaru. And my wish list is this. I get that you need to share development costs because let's be honest, this probably cost them at least $3 billion to create one new vehicle. So I totally get why a car manufacturer or multiple car manufacturers have to work together to share the cost of development. But if you're gonna do it, can you make two different vehicles on the same platform? So in this case, you need an SUV or a crossover kind of thing. Maybe in the Subaru, make it more of a station wagon, lower it a bit, make it something that Subaru people like so it's differentiated from the Toyota. Not two of the same things. That's basically all I got to say on that topic. And this is where I turn the episode around to you guys to opine in the comments below or via our social media, MotoManTV all one word, MotoManTV all one word, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And with that, I once again humbly request your help with the algorithm. What does that mean? Subscribe, notifications, but most importantly, clicking like. Literally like 2% of you do this on every episode. And of course, sharing these episodes with all of your friends on your socials. And then one more thing I do have to share with you. We talked about an electric vehicle in a parking lot today, but the next episode coming up is an almost 400 horsepower two-door car on a racetrack.